You're watching Midnight Creed, where every story hides a deep secret and an unexpected twist that will keep you on edge. If you love suspense, mysterious and thrilling tales, hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. Tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Welcome to Midnight Creed. Let's start the story.
Chapter 1. The lantern that flickered out. It had been snowing since afternoon. Fine and persistent, a soft white veil that blurred the edges of the Frostbridge estate and made the world beyond its gates seem very far away. From the window of the guest bedroom allocated to him, Hercule Poirot regarded the landscape with a thoughtful satisfaction. He was a man who enjoyed comfort, and the scene below pleased him. The neat symmetry of the drive, the orderly line of yew hedges now frosted in white, and the blaze of light from the great hall windows that fell in warm rectangles upon the snow. Frostbridge Manor was not a beautiful house in any romantic sense. It did not brood, nor did it loom. It stood square and dignified, with its grey stone, its rows of tall panes, and its high chimneys. It was a prosperous, self-assured English house, and on this Christmas Eve it was dressed to display that self-assurance in full. Poirot's gaze shifted to the great oak doors being held open by the butler as another car drew up. A woman descended first, wrapped in a sable coat that seemed almost too luxurious for the modest car that had brought her. She was followed by a tall man carrying her hat-box and a small valise. Even from this distance Poirot detected in the woman a conscious grace, the unmistakable posture of someone who expected to be observed and admired. "Miss Lydia Vale," he murmured to himself. And behind her the husband of someone else, or perhaps merely an admirer. We shall see. He smiled, not with mockery, but in quiet anticipation. Sir Henry Frostbridge had written to him 3 weeks earlier, extending the invitation. "You must come, Poirot. We shall make a proper English festival of it. I insist. There will be the usual family tensions, a touch of boredom, too much food, and dreadful party games. It will do you good." Poirot, who did not consider boredom to be medicinal, had nevertheless accepted. There was in Sir Henry's letter a tone that had not been there before, a slight heaviness, the weight of advancing age and something more, something unspoken. As he turned from the window, smoothing his tie with a fastidious hand, Poirot reflected that he was not here merely to enjoy Christmas pudding. Sir Henry had been a loyal friend over many years. If he summoned Poirot now, there was a reason downstairs. The hall of Frostbridge Manor was already alive with voices when Poirot descended. Garlands of dark green hung along the balustrades, threaded with crimson ribbon and tiny golden ornaments that caught the light. At the far end of the hall, above the great central space, hung the centerpiece of the Frostbridge Christmas tradition, the mistletoe lantern. It was larger than Poirot had expected. A wrought iron cage, fashioned in an old style, held within it a cluster of candles, their wax formed into the shape of berries. Around the metal frame, real mistletoe was woven in thick, pale green sprays, its white berries gleaming softly in the hall's light. Chains held the lantern suspended from the beamed ceiling, directly above the spot where the polished parquet floor formed a subtle starburst pattern. Beneath that lantern, it was said, every Christmas Eve at 11 o'clock, the family and their guests gathered for a moment of silence before the candles were lit. Afterwards, couples stood beneath it to exchange kisses, and the younger members of the party pretended indifference and watched with bright eyes. "Ah, Poirot, there you are." Sir Henry Frostbridge advanced towards him with a stout, slightly rolling gait, his hand extended. He was in his late 60s now, his hair more silver than iron, and his cheeks flushed from the heat of the room and perhaps from something poured generously into his glass. "My dear Sir Henry," Poirot said, taking his hand, "you are looking as well as any man can look who attempts to ignore the passing of the years." Sir Henry laughed. "You see, this is why one needs you at Christmas. You tell the truth, but you dress it properly. Come, let me introduce you around. The house is overrun with people, and most of them are mine, to my lasting astonishment." There were, as Sir Henry had promised, many people. Poirot was introduced to them in a flurry of names and handshakes. Jonathan Frostbridge, Sir Henry's son stood a little apart, a man of 35 with a strong jaw and thoughtful eyes, his dark hair already showing a touch of grey at the temples. He greeted Poirot politely, but there was a reserve about him, a sense of someone who had long ago learned to carry burdens without complaint. Claire Frostbridge, Henry's daughter, was quite different. She came forward with quick steps, her face bright, her blue eyes inquiring. "It is a great honor, Mr. Poirot," she said. "Father speaks of you often. I am half afraid to be in the same room as you. I shall feel guilty of something in a moment, whether I have done it or not." "An entirely unnecessary fear, mademoiselle," Poirot replied. "Only those who lie to themselves need dread the truth." "That sounds rather ominous on Christmas Eve," she said, but she smiled and moved away, called by someone across the hall. Poirot observed her as she went. There was in her a quickness, a tendency to respond at once without calculation. Such natures were capable of great loyalty and of sudden, reckless decisions. Dr. Evelyn Marsh was next, a slim woman in her 40s who wore her dark hair pinned neatly and her expression even more neatly arranged. Her handshake was brief and competent. "I have heard of your work, Monsieur Poirot," she said. "Let us hope my services as a physician are not required during this house party." "Let us hope so indeed, Doctor," Poirot replied. "Yet life has a way of consulting our preferences very little." The Reverend Amos Kettering arrived shortly afterwards, shaking snow from his hat and apologizing for his lateness, which no one had remarked upon. Colonel Lionel Hargreaves, red-faced and booming, had already installed himself near the fireplace and spoke at length about his experiences overseas. Miss Lydia Vale made her entrance with the artful delay of someone accustomed to turning heads, and among them all moved the essential staff of the house. Simmons, the butler, tall and grave, Mrs. Groves, the housekeeper with a vigilant eye, and young Alice, a maid whose nervous glances suggested she was new to such grand occasions. There was also, arriving just as the clock in the hall chimed 7, a man whom Poirot did not know. He was in his middle 40s, with a narrow, intelligent face and eyes that missed very little. His coat was good, but not new. The cuffs were faintly worn. He carried himself with the assurance of one accustomed to boardrooms rather than drawing-rooms. Sir Henry greeted him with warmth. "Poirot, this is Malcolm Armitage, my business adviser and, if I may be forgiven the term, my right hand." "Malcolm, this is Hercule Poirot, whom I am proud to call my friend." Armitage's handshake was firm. "I have, of course, heard your name," he said. "I hope you will find Frostbridge Manor free of criminal interest." Poirot smiled. "It is an agreeable hope, Monsieur Armitage. Reality, however, has a sense of humor." Armitage's lips twitched. "So my clients often discover." Dinner was a long, lavish affair. The dining room glittered with silver and crystal. Candles burned in tall holders, casting little halos of light upon the polished table. Conversation ebbed and flowed in comfortable waves, broken now and then by a remark from Sir Henry that sent a ripple of laughter around the room. Poirot spoke little, but he listened. A habit that had long since become second nature. He noted the quick frown that crossed Jonathan Frostbridge's face when Sir Henry mentioned some recent investment. He noticed the fleeting glance between Miss Vale and Colonel Hargreaves when the subject of the theatre arose, and the way Dr. Marsh's hand tightened around her wine-glass. When the conversation turned to the decline of rural practices, he heard, too, the mention of the Frostbridge tradition. "It was my great-grandfather who began it," Sir Henry explained when Poirot asked about the mistletoe lantern. "The story goes that on the first Christmas Eve after the old wing was completed, there was a terrible storm. The lights failed, everything went dark, and the family were in some panic. Then he lit that lantern there, in the hall, and the storm passed without damage. He declared that as long as the lantern was lit on Christmas Eve, Frostbridge Manor would be protected." Colonel Hargreaves snorted. Superstitious nonsense, of course, but very fine nonsense. Lady Margaret, Sir Henry's younger sister, tapped the table lightly with her spoon. "Nonsense or not, Lionel, the tradition has been kept every year since. At 11 o'clock the candles are lit. It is the one moment in the year when Henry behaves like a patriarch in a family painting. There is also the kiss, Claire put in mischievously. You did not mention that part, Aunt Margaret. The lantern is supposed to bless any couple who kiss beneath it before midnight. That particular embellishment, Jonathan said dryly, was added by some romantic ancestor whose name we do not, for obvious reasons, recall. There was laughter, but Poirot did not laugh. Instead, he looked thoughtfully down the table at Malcolm Armitage, who had turned his head slightly, his attention focused on Sir Henry, in a way that did not match the lightness of the conversation. Later, in the drawing room, carols were attempted with varying degrees of enthusiasm. A game of charades was proposed and rejected. The Reverend told an anecdote that was polite but not amusing. Glasses were refilled. Outside, the snow continued to fall, thicker now, pressing against the windows in a shifting white curtain. At 10:30, Poirot found himself standing near the foot of the stairs, alone for the moment. The hall had taken on a different atmosphere. The lights had been dimmed slightly, throwing the garlands and ribbons into softer relief. On a side table near the wall, Simmons had arranged a silver tray with a neat row of glasses containing spiced wine. Mr. Poirot. He turned to see Alice, the young maid, hovering a little uncertainly beside him. Up close, he could see that she was perhaps 19, with fair hair drawn too severely back, as though she were trying to appear older than she was. Her hands were clasped tightly in front of her apron. "Yes, my child," he said gently. She glanced up at the lantern above them. "They say it has never gone out before, sir. Not once, since it was first lit all those years ago, the lantern." Poirot looked up at it. In the dim light it seemed almost to glow, though unlit. The mistletoe leaves, pale and thick, hung in generous clusters, their berries dotting the greenery like drops of milk. "Yes, sir. Mrs. Grove says that once, when the draught from the door nearly caught it, Sir Henry stood under it himself until midnight to make sure the candles stayed alight." "That is a very English act of devotion," Poirot said. "You are troubled by this." "No, sir, only," she broke off, biting her lip. "Only people say what it would mean if it ever did go out." "And what do people say?" She hesitated. "That it would mean Frostbridge Manor's luck had turned, that something terrible would happen, perhaps not at once, but soon enough." Poirot observed her for a moment. "And are you a believer in such stories?" She shook her head, but too quickly. "No, sir. No, of course not. It is only a story. It is just today there has been so much talk, raised voices, doors slamming. It makes a person nervous. And you have heard raised voices." Her eyes widened. "Oh, I should not have said anything, please, sir. I did not mean—" He raised a hand. "You have said nothing wrong, I assure you. Go now, or Mrs. Groves will think I am keeping you from your duties, and she will not be pleased with either of us." She managed a faint smile and hurried away. Poirot looked after her, his expression thoughtful. Raised voices, doors slamming. In a house such as this, on such a night, it might mean very little, or a great deal. At 11:05, Sir Henry's voice rang out. "If everyone will gather in the hall, we shall keep the Frostbridge tradition alive for another year. Simmons, the candles are ready." "Indeed, Sir Henry," the butler replied. "All is prepared." The guests drifted towards the center of the hall, some with an air of indulgent amusement, others with genuine anticipation. The younger members of the party arranged themselves with subtle calculation beneath the lantern, exchanging glances that would have been obvious to anyone less observant than Hercule Poirot. Sir Henry took his place beneath the mistletoe lantern. Simmons stood beside him, holding a long taper already lit at one end. The candles within the lantern waited, small white columns of promise, their wicks unburnt. "My friends," Sir Henry began, his voice rich and a little unsteady as it echoed in the high space. "Every year we make this little gesture. We are perhaps not as superstitious as our ancestors, but we are not ungrateful either. We have shelter, warmth, and most of the time, each other. That is more than a man has the right to ask. There was a murmur of appreciation. Poirot watched the faces around him. Claire's bright and attentive, Jonathan's grave, Dr. Marsh's controlled, Colonel Hargreaves's slightly bemused, Lydia Vale's half, smiling and yet, behind the smile, distracted Malcolm Armitage's sharpened, as though he were listening not only to the words but to what lay beneath them. "And so," Sir Henry continued, "we light the lantern as a sign that Frostbridge Manor is still a home, for better or worse." He nodded to Simmons. The butler lifted the taper and reached up towards the lantern. For a moment he was silhouetted against it, his arm raised, the flame glowing at the tip of the slender wax rod. Carefully, he touched the taper to the first wick. It caught at once, a small, bright tongue of flame. One by one he lit the others, until the lantern was filled with a cluster of steady lights. The effect was remarkable. The hall seemed to gather itself around that central glow. Shadows softened, the mistletoe leaves gleamed faintly, the chains gleamed like old gold, Poirot felt, rather than saw. The slight movement to his left as someone stepped forward, just out of line with the rest of the guests. He did not turn his head. His eyes remained on the lantern, but in his peripheral vision he was aware of a hand, pale in the candlelight, lifted slightly as if to reach up. No, as if to indicate something. There was a breath of silence, the kind that falls upon a group when the expected moment has been reached. Then, without warning, one of the flames in the lantern fluttered. It was a small disturbance, but it broke the perfection of the scene. The flame dipped, swayed, and then steadied. "Even candles are allowed to tremble," Sir Henry said lightly. "They are only human after all." There was a little laugh at that, quickly cut short by what followed. The same flame, and then another beside it, began to flicker violently, as though struck by an unseen gust of air. The light of the lantern danced erratically, shadows leaping around the hall. A murmur rose from the assembled guests. Poirot's eyes narrowed. He felt no draught. The doors were closed, the windows tightly shut against the snow. Yet within the iron cage the flames twisted and guttered. One went out, and then the candles died almost together, snuffed out, their thin trails of smoke curling upwards in the sudden darkness beneath the lantern. Only the wall sconces and lamps remained, their steadier, more prosaic illumination asserting itself. There was a collective intake of breath. Someone gave a little cry, quickly stifled. "Now that," Colonel Hargreaves began, forcing a chuckle, "is rather dramatic, what?" He did not finish his sentence, for at that moment, directly beneath the darkened lantern, the man who had stepped slightly forward, a man whom Poirot now recognized, with a jolt, as Malcolm Armitage, uttered a strangled sound and pitched forwards onto the polished floor. The fall was not graceful. It was not like the fainting of a young woman in a theater box. It was sudden, heavy and final. Glass slipped from his hand and shattered, sending fragments skittering across the parquet. Claire cried out his name. Sir Henry stared, his face drained of color. Simmons took an involuntary step back, the spent taper still in his hand. Poirot was already moving. The years had not lessened his speed where such emergencies were concerned. He reached Armitage's side as others still stared, held in that strange paralysis that overtakes groups confronted with the unexpected. "Stand back, if you please," Poirot said calmly. "Give him air." He knelt beside the fallen man. Armitage lay face down, one arm flung out at an awkward angle, his head turned slightly to one side. Poirot touched the shoulder with delicate fingers and rolled him onto his back. The face that stared up at him was unrecognizable, in the worst sense of that word. The eyes were wide. Unfocused, the mouth slightly opened, there was a faint discoloration about the lips, a pallor that was more than shock. "Dr. Marsh," Poirot said, "if you will be so good." The physician was already coming forward, her professional instincts overcoming any personal reaction. She knelt opposite Poirot and placed her fingers at Armitage's throat. The hall was utterly silent. Somewhere in the house, a clock ticked, its sound oddly loud. After a moment, Dr. Marsh removed her hand. Her eyes met Poirot's across the still form. "I can find no pulse," she said, her voice, though controlled, was not quite steady. "He is dead." "Dead," Sir Henry repeated hoarsely. "But that is impossible. He was perfectly well this evening. He was joking with me not half an hour ago." "People do die suddenly," Colonel Hargreaves said gruffly, though his tone was uncertain. "Apoplexy, heart failure, any of those things." "Yes," Dr. Marsh said quietly, "it is possible. Sudden cardiac events do occur without warning." "Perhaps," Poirot said. His tone was mild, but there are also other possibilities. He adjusted his position slightly, and as he did so his gaze fell upon Armitage's right wrist. The hand lay palm, upwards on the floor, fingers slightly curled. Around the wrist was tied a narrow ribbon of deep crimson satin, knotted with care. Poirot's eyes sharpened. The ribbon was not part of the man's attire. It did not accord with his sober dark suit, his plain cufflinks, his understated tie. It was a jarring note, like a bright stain on a sheet of white paper. "Jonathan," Sir Henry said abruptly, his voice rising, "why are you standing there? Do something for heaven's sake." Jonathan, who had not moved since the fall, stirred as if waking from a dream. "There is nothing to be done, Father," he said quietly. "The doctor has said so." Poirot touched the ribbon with the tip of one finger. It was smooth, clean, without fraying. The knot was firm but not constricting. There was no mark of pressure on the skin beneath it. "Mr. Poirot," Claire's voice trembled. "What is it? Why are you looking at his hand?" Poirot sat back on his heels and looked up at the ring of faces, pale, shocked, and expectant. Above them, the mistletoe lantern hung dark and empty, its candles little blackened stubs. "Because, mademoiselle," he said slowly, "the smallest details are often the most important. Our friend here did not, I think, tie this ribbon around his own wrist for a festive decoration." Simmons, who had drawn closer in spite of himself, swallowed audibly. "It is one of the ribbons from the garlands, sir. We used the same kind on the banisters and in the lantern decoration." "And how would such a ribbon come to be around Mr. Armitage's wrist?" Reverend Kettering asked. "Surely one of the ladies." Poirot shook his head. "Number, this is not the gesture of playfulness that you imagine. It is too precise, too deliberate." He rose slowly to his feet. His expression, usually composed, had taken on a new stillness, as though some internal mechanism had begun to move. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice firm but not loud, "I must ask you all to remain calm. A man has died in your midst. It may be that his death is natural. It may also be that it is not." "Not natural?" Sir Henry stared at him. "You cannot mean—" "I mean only that we do not yet know. But I will tell you this. The lantern that has never gone out in all the years of your family's tradition has been extinguished at the very moment of this man's death. And upon his wrist is tied a ribbon that speaks of intention rather than accident. When such things occur together, it is not wise to dismiss them as coincidence." "But what are you saying?" Claire whispered. Poirot looked around the circle of faces, meeting each pair of eyes in turn. "I am saying, mademoiselle, that there is every reason to suspect that Malcolm Armitage did not die by chance. On this night of peace and goodwill, beneath the symbol of your family's protection, it is very possible that someone in this house has committed the most serious of crimes." The words fell into the silence like stones into deep water. Above them, the mistletoe leaves stirred faintly as if in a breath of air, though no one felt a draught, and the dark lantern, its candles dead and cold, swung very slightly on its chains. Chapter 2, Footsteps vanishing in the snow. The hall of Frostbridge Manor had fallen into a strained and unnatural stillness, as though the air itself held its breath. Sir Henry, pale and trembling, had been guided gently toward a chair by Simmons. Claire moved about with restless agitation, her hands twisting together. Jonathan stood motionless, his expression unreadable, while Lydia Vale pressed a delicate handkerchief to her lips and looked around with wide, dark eyes that suggested both fear and fascination. Poirot, however, was focused entirely upon the dead man lying beneath the extinguished lantern. Malcolm Armitage's features were still composed in that terrible fixed repose, the faint discoloration around his mouth lending a sinister suggestion that something more than mere fate had claimed him. The crimson ribbon, stark against his wrist, seemed almost to glow under the hall's remaining lights, fragile yet unmistakably purposeful. Dr. Marsh had confirmed the obvious fact of death, but offered no explanation. "We will need more information," she had murmured, her professional calm not quite masking her disquiet. "To certify the cause, well, I cannot yet presume." Poirot nodded. "Just so, Doctor, there is much that we do not yet know, and one does not illuminate the darkness by assuming." He rose then, his eyes tracing a slow, deliberate circle around the hall as though committing every face, every posture, to memory. "Sir Henry," Poirot said gently, "I should like to step outside for a few moments. The snow may hold certain impressions before it is too late." Sir Henry looked at him blankly. "Outside at this hour? But the storm?" "The storm," Poirot said, "is precisely why I must go now. Snow is a faithful servant but a ruthless master." He stopped himself, remembering the prohibition. "But a ruthless master," he concluded. "It preserves only for a little while." Jonathan stepped forward. "Poirot, if there is something dangerous, there is something dangerous everywhere, my friend. It does not confine itself to gardens and courtyards, but I thank you for your concern." Poirot retrieved his overcoat and scarf from the stand, buttoning himself with neat precision. He took a lantern from Simmons, this one safe and modern, electric, and stepped into the entrance hall where the cold seeped under the door like a silent intruder. When he pulled the heavy front door open, the wind struck him at once, sharp and frigid. Snowflakes tumbled in thick, swirling eddies, their relentless descent muffling all sound. The world outside was hushed beneath the storm. Even the shapes of the hedges and statuary seemed smoothed into indistinct mounds, as though the night had decided to conceal everything. Poirot stood for a moment on the doorstep, allowing his eyes to adjust to the dimness. The lantern cast a pale halo upon the whitened ground, illuminating only a portion of the courtyard before him. Then he began to move, slowly, carefully, his gaze directed downward. The courtyard was a broad open space to the left of the manor, bordered by low walls and overlooking the frozen garden pond. It was here, earlier in the evening, that the staff had brought in greenery and decorative sprigs of winter foliage. Now, however, it lay deserted and silent, save for one thing. Poirot saw it immediately: footprints, a single set. They began at the side entrance to the courtyard, a door frequently used by staff, and moved outwards in a straight line, purposeful and steady. Each print was sharply defined, the tread deep and regular, indicating a man of average weight wearing boots with a firm sole. Poirot followed the trail, holding the lantern low. The snow had not yet filled the impressions, though flakes were accumulating. He studied each print as though it contained a secret. "Someone had left the house," he murmured. "At what time, and more importantly, why?" But it was what happened next that drew him to a halt. The footprints stopped abruptly, completely. One moment they marched forward with methodical clarity, and the next, the snow lay smooth and unbroken, stretching away untouched in every direction, as though the walker had vanished. Poirot crouched, brushing aside a layer of powder with gentle fingertips. No indentation lay beneath, no faint depression. Nothing to suggest further movement, only the crisp, undisturbed blanket of snow. Very softly, Poirot exhaled. "It is not magic," he murmured. "None. It is something else." He stood again, scanning the immediate surroundings. The courtyard wall was low, too low to prevent someone from leaping over it if they were determined. Yet the snow beyond was pristine as far as his lantern reached. No scramble marks, no drag of cloth or shoe. The wind gusted suddenly, and with it came a faint scent, thin, elusive, carried only for an instant, before it dissolved into the cold. Poirot inhaled again, his brows lifting. Smoke, not the heavy, tar-scented smoke of a fire. This was lighter, pungent, a trace that teased the senses without revealing its origin. His eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "There is no fire lit outside," he said aloud, "and none of the chimneys should expel smoke of that type." He turned slowly, letting the lantern's beam sweep across the courtyard. It caught on something, a small scrap of color amid the snow. Poirot moved toward it at once. Half buried in the snow lay a torn piece of fabric. He picked it up delicately, shaking free the powder that clung to it. It was a strip of cloth, perhaps 3 inches in length, finely woven, and colored a deep holly green. The edges were jagged, torn rather than cut. He held it up to the lantern. "Ah," Poirot said softly. "A hurried movement, a snag upon something sharp. And the one who wore this." He moved fast. He glanced around again. The fabric's color was not that of any servant's uniform, nor did it match the outfits worn by the guests during dinner, but it was a shade that could easily have been part of a coat, or scarf, or evening wrap. Something festive, perhaps, chosen deliberately for the holiday. Poirot slipped the fabric into his pocket. The wind rose, scattering snowflakes into his face. He turned back toward the footprints. Crouching again, he inspected the final impression. The edges of the print were crisp, too crisp to belong to someone who had, for example, stumbled. The depth was consistent with the prints that preceded it. "But then where?" Poirot murmured. "Did you go?" He stepped back, considering the mystery in full, a set of footprints that led away from the house, uninterrupted, until they ceased entirely, a faint scent of smoke, a torn strip of green cloth. The darkness around him thickened as the night pressed close. Frostbridge Manor loomed behind him, its windows glowing faintly, like tired eyes. Poirot stood very still, the snow settling on his shoulders, his breath forming pale clouds in the air. Then a distant sound reached him, a door opening. He turned sharply to see the side entrance of the manor ajar, light spilling out onto the snow. A figure stepped into the doorway, blinking against the cold. "Mr. Poirot?" The voice was Claire's, uncertain and tinged with fear. "Father said you had gone outside. Is everything all right?" Poirot raised the lantern so the light fell upon the footprints. "You see them, mademoiselle?" Claire moved closer, her brow furrowed. "Yes, footprints. Were they made by Mr. Armitage?" "Possibly," Poirot said, "though one cannot assume. But look closely, if you will." She bent to examine them. After a moment, she straightened, puzzled. "They stop." "Precisely. But how can that be? A person does not simply disappear in the snow." "No," Poirot agreed softly. "A person does not, and yet someone has contrived to leave no further trace." Claire shivered. "Does this mean the killer went this way?" Poirot did not answer immediately. He let the silence stretch, letting Claire's imagination reach the edges of her own question. "It means," he said at last, "that someone wished to create the appearance of departure, or perhaps the appearance of impossibilities." She stared at him. "I don't understand." Poirot turned to her, taking her gently by the arm. "Come, mademoiselle. It is too cold for explanations, but listen carefully. What has happened tonight? The extinguished lantern, the sudden death, the ribbon, and now these footprints. None of it is random. Someone in this house has woven together these moments with deliberate purpose." Claire swallowed hard. "Do you truly believe someone among us murdered Mr. Armitage?" Poirot looked back at the footprints. Sharp, clean, then vanishing without a whisper. "I believe," he said slowly, "that whatever happened inside the hall was not an accident, and what I see here confirms that the one responsible took steps, very careful, very calculated steps, to mislead." A gust of wind rattled the branches above, scattering flakes onto the lantern's glass. Claire hugged her arms around herself. Should we go back inside?" "Yes," Poirot said. "And you must compose yourself. These discoveries must not be known widely. Not yet. Panic and rumor are unhelpful companions in a house where truth already hides." As they made their way back toward the manor, Poirot cast one final look over his shoulder. The footprints remained clear for now, but with each passing minute, the falling snow blurred their sharp edges, softening them into fading impressions. Soon they would vanish entirely. Inside the hall, the atmosphere had changed yet again. Guests spoke in low voices, some clustered tightly, others pacing. Simmons had discreetly covered Armitage's body with a woolen throw. Though the outline beneath was unmistakable, Dr. Marsh stood nearby, hands clasped behind her back, her eyes troubled. Sir Henry approached as Poirot re-entered, his expression both hopeful and fearful. "Well, did you find anything?" Poirot removed his coat with careful deliberation. "I found, Sir Henry, a set of footprints, a single trail leading away from the manor. Armitage's, that I cannot yet say. But I can tell you that the footprints did not lead to any gate, nor to any road, nor even to the far end of the courtyard." Sir Henry frowned. "What do you mean?" "They ended," Poirot replied, "in snow untouched beyond, as if the walker stepped nowhere." There was a murmur, a shiver of unease that passed through the room like a chill. "Perhaps," Colonel Hargreaves said, forcing a blustering tone, "the wind filled them in." Poirot shook his head. Number the snow was too newly fallen. The prints were perfectly sharp, and they simply stopped. "What explanation is there?" "Then," Jonathan demanded, his reserve slipping, "are you suggesting Armitage flew away?" "But I do suggest this. Someone wished to present the illusion that the person who left those prints either vanished or continued in a way that the snow does not show." Poirot reached into his pocket and drew out the torn strip of holly green fabric. "I also found this," Claire gasped. Lydia Vale leaned forward, intrigued. Colonel Hargreaves squinted at the cloth. Sir Henry's eyes darkened. "Where?" "Near the end of the footprints." "Meaning it was torn by the person who made them?" "Precisely." Poirot let the fabric rest upon his palm. "This piece of cloth will tell us something important about the one who wore it, and perhaps about where they intended to go. Who among us owns something made of that color?" Lydia asked softly. Jonathan glanced at her sharply. "Why the eagerness, Lydia?" She gave him a cool smile. "The question must be asked, must it not? If someone tore a part of their garment, it will be noticeable." Poirot studied the fragment again. "This fabric is of good quality. It could be from a coat, or a scarf, or even decorative trimming. I shall make inquiries, but discreetly I do not announce suspicion until I have certainty." He turned slightly, his gaze sweeping the guests. "But let me say this. Mr. Armitage's death was not an act of nature. I suspect it was neither sudden nor inexplicable. Someone here carried out an act with intent." Dr. Marsh stepped forward. "Poirot, do you have cause to believe poison was involved?" Poirot inclined his head. "It is one possibility." The discoloration around his lips suggests something ingested or administered, but we shall see. Claire's voice trembled. "Poirot, if it was poison, then the killer must still be here, must they not?" Poirot's eyes settled on her with quiet gravity. "Yes, mademoiselle. If murder has been done tonight, the one who committed it is indeed here, in this house, among us." Silence fell again. Heavy, suffocating, weighted with the knowledge that none could escape the implications. Poirot moved toward the lantern above the hall, its extinguished candle still blackened. He regarded it thoughtfully. "The lantern flickered before the fall," he said. "A signal, perhaps, or an effect of what was already set in motion." Jonathan stared upward. "But the lantern has never gone out, not in all these years." Poirot's voice was quiet, yet carried through the hall with clarity. "Then perhaps," he said, "tonight marks the first time someone desired the illusion that the house's protection had failed." He turned to the assembled guests, his posture impeccably straight. "And that illusion," he added, "was used to cloak a murder." Chapter 3. The five who hoped he would not arrive. The first shock of Malcolm Armitage's death had passed, leaving behind a different kind of tension. Fear, once it settles, hardens into something more enduring. It was in the set of shoulders, the guarded way eyes slid away from one another, the sudden awareness in each person that their actions, their words, even their silences, might now matter in ways they had not anticipated. Sir Henry had telephoned the local police station as soon as Dr. Marsh had pronounced Armitage dead. The line crackled. The response had been polite and unhelpful. "The roads are difficult, Sir Henry," the sergeant had said. "The snow has been coming down all evening. We shall send someone at once, but you must not count upon a quick arrival." Sir Henry had hung up with a hand that was not quite steady. "So we are to wait," he said bleakly. Poirot shook his head. "We are to prepare. When the police arrive, it will be of value to present to them something more than confusion." The guests had been gathered in the drawing room, where a low fire struggled against the creeping chill of the hour. Some sat, some paced, none were at ease. The corpse remained in the hall under Dr. Marsh's careful supervision, awaiting the eventual arrival of the authorities. Poirot requested of Sir Henry the use of a smaller room for interviews. Sir Henry led him to the study, a long book-lined chamber with a large desk, a pair of leather armchairs, and a single window that now looked out upon a wall of moving white. "I will send people to you," Sir Henry said. "Is that what you wish?" "If you please. But first, Sir Henry, tell me something. Aside from yourself and your children, who here is most closely concerned with Malcolm Armitage, in business, in money, in any matter where tensions might arise? I ask not who disliked him, for that is a list that might prove too long. I ask who had cause to wish he would not arrive tonight." Sir Henry's gaze shifted, his eyes darkening with thought. "There are several," he said at last, "more than I had fully considered until now." "Name them." He did so slowly, as though confessing some failing. "Widwin Roe, he is here as a guest. But he was once Armitage's partner briefly. It did not end well. Mrs. Groves, you know her as our housekeeper. She and Armitage had recent disagreements about economies in the household accounts." His mouth twisted. "He was very free with my money, and very strict with my staff." He hesitated. "Miss Vale," he continued. "Lydia Vale. She is a playwright, among other things. Armitage promised to back her new production, and then withdrew at the last moment. Embarrassing for her. I believe there is also Mrs. Lang, Beatrice Lang, the widow. Her husband died 2 years ago. Armitage handled her investments. She has been pressing him for repayment of a loan she made to bridge one of his schemes." He delayed repeatedly. Sir Henry seemed reluctant at the fifth name. "And the last?" Poirot prompted. "Our caretaker," Sir Henry said finally. "Arthur Hales. He looks after the grounds, the old traditions, everything that gives Frostbridge Manor its particular flavor." He and Armitage were at odds over some proposed development on the estate. Armitage was keen to sell a parcel of land. Hales believes such a sale would ruin the character of the place. "And these 5, Poirot said, "they knew Mr. Armitage would be here tonight." "Yes, I mentioned it. Perhaps I should not have done so." "Oh, but you should. For now we know something valuable, that there were at least 5 people in this house who might have sincerely hoped that Malcolm Armitage would not walk through your door at all." Sir Henry swallowed. "You think that is where we must begin?" "Yes, let us not busy ourselves yet with those who are merely shocked. We shall start with those who had reason to be relieved." He settled himself behind the desk, not as a magistrate, but as a patient listener. The lamp beside him cast a warm pool of light over the blotter, leaving the rest of the room in a softer gloom. "Send me Mr. Roe first, if you will." Sir Henry nodded and departed. Poirot listened to the sound of the door closing, to the faint murmur of voices in the corridor, to the whisper of the snow at the window. A few moments later, the door opened again, and Edwin Roe entered. Roe was in his early 50s, stocky rather than slim, with thinning hair and a complexion that might once have been ruddy, but now tended to a sallow hue. He wore a suit that had been good some seasons ago, and a tie that had seen better days. His mouth drooped slightly at one corner, giving his expression a hint of permanent dissatisfaction. You wish to see me, Mr. Poirot? His tone was cautious. Yes, if you please, do sit down. Rowe complied, perching on the edge of the chair as though ready to spring up at any moment. It is a grim business, he said. Dying under a lantern like that. I always said Armitage liked a dramatic gesture. You knew him well? Poirot asked. Rowe made a small, bitter sound. Well enough. We were partners once, in a small venture. Property mostly. He had an eye for figures. I will give him that. What he did not have was loyalty. You quarreled. We disagreed on how business should be conducted. He believed in cutting his losses. I believed in honoring promises. In the end, he cut me loose and kept the profitable parts for himself. Rowe's hands clenched on his knees. It set me back years. And yet you agreed to attend this house party, knowing he had been invited. Rowe hesitated. Sir Henry invited me as an old friend. We were at school together. I did not wish to refuse. As for Armitage, well, I hoped to avoid him. Or, failing that, to be civil. Poirot watched him closely. Is it true that he cheated you of money? Rowe's lips pressed together. He would have said it was merely sound business. But yes, I consider that he cheated me. You must be honest with me, Mr. Rowe. When you heard that Malcolm Armitage would be here tonight, did you hope that the snow would keep him away? Rowe gave a short, humorless laugh. Hope. I prayed for it. He caught himself flushing. What I mean is, of course I did. Who would welcome an old tormentor into their festive season? But that does not mean I wished him dead. No, many people wish a man removed from their affairs without being quite so specific about the method. Rowe scowled. I am not a murderer, if that is what you are implying. I may have wanted him to stay in London. That is all. Let us speak of your movements this evening. Poirot's voice remained mild. After dinner, where were you? In the drawing-room with everyone else. We had drinks. We made an attempt at carols. I recall Colonel Hargreaves shouting his way through most of them. And did you remain there until Sir Henry called everyone to the hall for the lantern lighting? Rowe shifted more or less. More or less, Poirot repeated. Rowe's jaw tightened. I stepped out for a few minutes, to the side hall, near the service entrance. I smoke, Mr. Poirot. It is not encouraged in those rooms, particularly when the decorations are up, so I went where I would not offend anyone. Outside then, I opened the door, but the snow was coming down so heavily I changed my mind. Poirot regarded him steadily. You are quite certain you did not step outside, even briefly? Rowe hesitated just a fraction too long. I may have put one foot on the threshold, no more. And did you see anyone? And the smell of smoke? Poirot asked. Rowe blinked. Smoke? In the courtyard, there was a faint scent, not from a fire. From something smaller, perhaps, a cigarette, or the burning of paper. Rowe's eyes flickered. It was not mine. I did not go that far, I tell you. The cold hit me at once, and I decided nothing in my lungs was worth it. Poirot let the silence stretch. What time was this? I cannot say exactly, Rowe muttered. Sometime between 10 and 11. Long between those times, Poirot said softly. Let us try to make it shorter. When Sir Henry called everyone to gather, were you already in the hall? Yes, I was standing near the back. Who can confirm this? Rowe frowned, thinking. Claire, Miss Frostbridge. She spoke to me about the lantern legend and Colonel Hargreaves, I believe. He pushed past me to get a better view. Poirot inclined his head. That will do for now, Mr. Rowe. You may return to the others. When Rowe had left, Poirot sat without moving for a moment. A man who claims to have gone to the door and not quite through it, he murmured. A dislike of the cold is understandable, but an exactness about the position of one foot. This is interesting. He rang the bell beside the desk. After a moment, Mrs. Groves entered, her back straight, her face expressionless. Sir Henry said you wished to see me, Mr. Poirot. Indeed, please, sit down, Mrs. Groves. I would rather stand if you do not mind. She folded her hands before her apron. As you prefer, Poirot said. You have been housekeeper here for how long? 23 years. There was pride in her tone. Since Sir Henry's father was alive. Then you know this house better than anyone. I know it well enough. You also knew Malcolm Armitage. Her expression tightened. He came here often as Sir Henry's man of business. Too often, in my opinion. In what way? In the way that men do who think numbers give them the right to interfere with things that do not concern them. He spoke a great deal about economies, about trimming the household staff, about waste. Her voice did not rise, but the words carried a weight of long-held resentment. He wished to dismiss some of the servants, Poirot asked. Yes, the older ones, those who had given their lives to this house. He called them useless. I called them loyal. You opposed him. I gave Sir Henry my opinion. He listened. He may not have been as firm with Mr. Armitage as I would have liked, but he has a conscience. And Mr. Armitage, he had a ledger. Poirot studied her face. It has been said to me that you are secretive, Mrs. Groves, that there are matters in this house you do not share. Her eyes flashed. I protect this family, Mr. Poirot, that is my duty. I do not discuss their private affairs with outsiders. That is what people mean when they call me secretive. You also protect the staff? When they deserve it. Did you wish Mr. Armitage would not come this evening? Mrs. Groves did not hesitate. Yes. Because you feared what changes he would try to enforce? Yes. Because you were afraid he might reveal some secret of the household? Her gaze hardened. He knew nothing of the sort. He was not interested in people, only in costs. Where were you between 10 and 11 o'clock? In the back corridors, making sure the staff were prepared for the lantern ceremony, checking that the spiced wine was ready, that the hall lamps were adjusted, that Simmons had the taper. Did you at any time go outside? Are you certain? Yes. Did you see anyone who did? She hesitated. I saw Mr. Hales in the side hall shortly before the ceremony. He had snow on his shoulders. The caretaker. Yes, he comes and goes as he pleases. The grounds are his kingdom. Did you speak with him? Only to tell him not to bring snow into my clean floors. Her mouth tightened. He did not answer. He rarely does. And Malcolm Armitage, did you see him alone at any point this evening? She paused, then nodded. He came into the service passage after dinner, said he was looking for the gentleman's cloakroom, but no one uses that passage for that. He asked which door led to the side entrance. I told him. He was carrying a glass. At what time? Sometime after 10. The exact minute I could not say. I had work to do, Mr. Poirot. Of course. That will be all for now, Mrs. Groves. She inclined her head and withdrew. Poirot allowed himself a small sigh. A woman who admits she wished he had not come. A woman who directs him herself towards the door that leads to the courtyard. He rang again. This time Lydia Vale entered before the servant who had been dispatched to find her could announce her. She closed the door behind her with a decisive movement. You want to talk to me, Mr. Poirot. Let us not pretend otherwise. Poirot rose politely. Please, take a seat, Miss Vale. She did so, lounging in the chair with a kind of deliberate grace up close. Her beauty had finer lines than it seemed at a distance. There were faint shadows at the corners of her eyes, and the set of her mouth suggested that laughter did not come as easily to her as she might pretend. You are a playwright, I understand. Poirot began. She smiled faintly. Among other indignities. Yes, and Malcolm Armitage was involved with one of your productions. Involved, she repeated with distaste. He expressed interest in backing it, talked about bringing in investors, securing a theater, arranging an advertising campaign. He used all the right words. But when it came time to sign contracts, he vanished. He sent a letter filled with apologies and vague references to market conditions. I was left to explain to everyone else why the man who had talked so big had suddenly remembered prudence. You were angry. Wouldn't you have been? Theatre people talk, Mr. Poirot. Reputations are not made on money alone. They are made on reliability. I was made to look foolish, and that is a crime in my world. And in this world, her eyes met his, dark and steady. "You want to know if I wished him dead? I did not. I wished him humiliated. I wished him exposed, but dead men receive more sympathy than I care to grant him. Yet you accepted Sir Henry's invitation, knowing that Armitage would be present." "I thought it might amuse me to see him again," she said coolly, "to watch him attempt charm in a different setting, perhaps even to make him uncomfortable. You may call it petty if you like. I do not mind." Poirot tilted his head. "Tell me of your movements this evening." "I was in the drawing room with the others after dinner. I joined Claire at the piano for a time. We sang poorly, I admit. At some point, Jonathan and Colonel Hargreaves began arguing about the merits of some investment, so I drifted to the far side of the room." "You did not leave the drawing room?" "For a few minutes, yes. I went to fetch a shawl from the cloakroom. This house believes in drafts." She rubbed her arms lightly. "It must have been 11:15 when I came back. Sir Henry was already calling us to the hall." "Did you encounter anyone while you were away?" She hesitated. "I saw Mrs. Lang in the corridor, near the telephone alcove." She looked agitated. "I assumed she was waiting her turn to call someone." "Perhaps she was." "And Malcolm Armitage?" "I did not see him in that moment." Poirot glanced at her dress. It was dark, with a narrow band of decorative stitching at the cuffs and neckline. "No green. Do you own a garment of holly, green fabric?" he asked. Her gaze sharpened. "That is a rather specific question. I am interested in a particular piece of torn cloth. You think it might be mine? I think it might be anyone's, Miss Vale. That is why I ask." She leaned back, considering. "I own a green coat." "Yes. Velvet. It is hanging in the cloakroom with everyone else's things." "Why?" "May I see it later, if you wish?" There was an edge now to her voice. "You may examine whatever you like, Mr. Poirot, but I warn you, if your investigation ruins my coat, that will be one more grievance I owe to Malcolm Armitage's memory." Poirot allowed himself a faint smile. "I shall be gentle, I promise. You may go for now." When she had left, he wrote a single word on the blotter in small, neat script, "Coat." The next to arrive was Mrs. Lang. She came in hesitantly, holding a small reticule in both hands. Beatrice Lang was a woman in her late 30s, though grief had etched older lines into her face. She wore a simple black dress with a string of pearls that did not quite disguise the threadbare quality of the fabric at the cuffs. Her eyes were anxious. "Mr. Poirot," she began at once, "I would never— I did not. I know what people will think, but—" Poirot raised a hand gently. "Sit, Mrs. Lang, and breathe. No one has accused you of anything." "Not yet," she said bitterly. "But it will come, it always does, when money is involved. You were a client of Malcolm Armitage." "My husband was. When he died, his investments passed to me. I relied on Mr. Armitage's advice. I wish I had not. He mismanaged your finances. He tied them up," she said, "in schemes that were supposed to yield returns. When they did not, he said, we must be patient. When I pressed him, he said he could arrange a loan from his own resources, temporarily to ease my situation. I agreed. I signed papers. The loan was paid into my account. I felt relief, and then he called it in." Her hands tightened on the reticule. "He said he needed his capital back for another project. He wanted full repayment with interest. I told him I could not meet those terms. He said he would be willing to renegotiate if I would sign over part of my remaining investments to him." Poirot's eyes darkened. "And you refused?" "I did. For once I refused. He did not like it. We argued. That was 3 weeks ago. And he knew you would be here tonight." "Yes, I wrote to him. I said I would be at Frostbridge Manor at Sir Henry's invitation. I asked him to bring the necessary papers. I did not wish to have him at my own house. It seemed easier here." "Did you fear the meeting?" "I dreaded it," she whispered. "I hoped the weather would prevent him from coming. I hoped he would have some minor mishap, a broken axle, a delayed train, something trivial, anything that would give me one more week." "Did you wish him dead, Mrs. Lang?" She looked at him then. tears standing in her eyes. Number, I wished him powerless. That is not the same thing. Your movements this evening. I was mostly with the others after dinner. I sat in the corner of the drawing room near the drinks cabinet. I did not feel like singing. At some point, just before 10, I think, Malcolm came and sat beside me. Her voice shook. He said we should not make a scene here, that he would bring the papers tomorrow and we would come to some agreement. He took my hand, as though we were friends. I pulled it away. Then Colonel Hargreaves called him over and he left me. Did you see him again? Yes, once more shortly before the lantern was lit. Where? In the corridor. She swallowed. Near the side entrance. I had gone to the telephone. I wanted to call my sister and wish her a happy Christmas Eve, but the line was engaged. When I came back along the corridor, I saw Malcolm standing by the door, looking out at the snow. He had a glass in his hand. What time was this? I cannot be sure. Perhaps 10 minutes before Sir Henry called us. Perhaps less. Did he speak to you? He said only. Still here, Mrs. Lang, I said. Where else should I be? He laughed and told me to enjoy the evening while I could. And then I went back to the drawing room. When Sir Henry called us to the hall, I went with the others. I stood on the left, near the banister. Who was beside you, Reverend Kettering? He asked if I was all right. I suppose I did not look it. Poirot nodded. Thank you, Mrs. Lang. You have been frank, and that is of value. As she left, he noted another word on the blotter door. The last of the 5 was Arthur Hales. He entered with reluctance, as though dragged from his proper realm and forced into an unfamiliar one. Hales was lean, all bone and sinew, with a strong, weathered face and eyes as pale as the winter sky. He wore a thick woolen sweater under a heavy jacket, and there was still a trace of melted snow on his boots. You wanted me, he said without preamble. Yes, Mr. Hales, please close the door. Hales did so, remaining standing. You have care of the grounds here, Poirot said. I do, and of certain traditions associated with the house. The lantern, if that is what you mean, among other things. I see to it every year. You hung the mistletoe lantern this afternoon? Yes. I checked the chains, the fixings, the candles. It was secure, and yet it went out. So I am told? You were not in the hall when it happened. He frowned. I was at the back, near the main doors. You did not see the moment when the flames flickered and died. I saw enough, the guests gasped. Sir Henry looked as though someone had struck him. You care for that lantern, Poirot observed. Hales's jaw set. It has hung in that hall longer than any of us have been alive. It means something to this place. And you believed Malcolm Armitage's plans would threaten that? Hales considered him. He wanted to sell a stretch of woodland that lies beyond the south field, said it was underused, said he could bring in a developer to build modern houses. People will pay anything for a country view, he said. Those were his words. You opposed this. I told Sir Henry it would carve Frostbridge up. Once you let one development in, others follow. The paths I maintain, the sight lines, the views, everything that makes this place what it is, would be gone. Sir Henry listened. He listened. He did not decide. He said he must consider his finances. Did you confront Mr. Armitage directly? I spoke my mind, loudly. If necessary. Where were you between 10 and 11 o'clock? Outside, Hales replied, making a final inspection of the lantern from the courtyard. I look for drafts. You see, I check that the doors are tight, the windows sealed. A small change in air can alter how the candles burn. In that storm, I have seen worse. You came in by the side entrance? Yes, Mrs. Groves says you had snow on your shoulders. Then she saw truly. Did you notice a set of footprints leading away from the house? Hales hesitated. I saw many prints earlier, staff going in and out, guests taking the air before the snow grew heavy. I speak of a single clear trail leading out across the courtyard and then stopping. He frowned. I saw something of the sort when I came in. I thought my eyes were playing tricks. The snow was blowing. I intended to have a look later. I did not know I would be summoned for this. Did you go as far as the last print? Number I came in. Mrs. Groves would have had my hide for bringing more snow into her domain. And Malcolm Armitage, did you see him outside at any point? I saw him at the side door, peering out, glass in hand. That man rarely moved without a drink. He asked me something about the view in summer. I told him he would not see it if he covered it in concrete. He laughed. Then I left him there. At what time was this? Closed at 10:30, I suppose. After that, were you alone outside? Yes, no one else was foolish enough to be out in that weather. Poirot regarded him. You were not seen by anyone between the time you left Mr. Armitage at the door and the moment you came in to stand at the back of the hall. Number, you understand that leaves you without a witness for that interval. I do not require a witness to know my own innocence, Hale said curtly. No, Poirot agreed gently, but the law sometimes does. Haley's eyes narrowed. Are you accusing me? I accuse no one. I gather facts. You may go. When Hales had gone, Poirot sat alone in the study, the lamplight steady by his elbow. On the blotter before him were a few words, written in his small, neat hand. Doorcoat smoke money lantern. He tapped the pen lightly against the paper. 5 people, each with a reason to dread Armitage's arrival. 5 people who, by their own admission, had hoped the snow or fate might keep him away. Each had an alibi of sorts. Each had been somewhere with someone doing something. And yet, in each story there were gaps. A few minutes here, a corridor there, a door half open to the storm. Edwin Rowe had gone to the side hall to smoke and claimed to have drawn back from the cold. Mrs. Groves had directed Armitage himself to the side entrance and then busied herself in the back corridors. Unseen, Lydia Vale had left the drawing-room for her shawl and seen Beatrice Lang near the telephone. Beatrice Lang had met Armitage at the side door and heard his unnerving remark. Arthur Hales had been outside inspecting drafts, entirely unwitnessed. The same locations repeated: the side entrance, the telephone alcove, the corridor, the courtyard, the faint scent of smoke, the torn holly, green fabric, the footsteps that marched out into the snow and then, impossibly, stopped. Poirot let the pen rest. Each of them, he said softly to the empty room, hoped he would not arrive. Yet he did. Now each hopes that I will not arrive at the truth. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes half closed, seeing in his mind's eye the great hall with its dark lantern, the body beneath, and the faces above. Their alibis, he murmured, are like the footprints in the snow, clear at first glance, but look closely, and you see that they, too, end just where it matters most. Chapter 4. The Carol That Stopped Mid. Note the wind-rattled Frostbridge Manor with renewed insistence as the night pressed deeper. The snowstorm outside grew heavier still, a white curtain sealing the house from the world beyond. Within its walls, however, something more chilling than winter air had begun to seep fear, suspicion, and the first faint whispers of guilt. Poirot had not allowed himself even the briefest rest after the interviews. Instead, he requested one final detour before he rejoined the assembled guests. "Sir Henry," he said quietly, "there is one room I must examine at once. You mentioned earlier that there had been singing this evening." "Yes," Sir Henry replied wearily. "Claire insisted we attempt some of the old carols. The music hall was open for the purpose." "The music hall," Poirot repeated. "Where the piano is kept. Precisely, it has excellent acoustics, or so Lydia always says." Poirot inclined his head. "Take me there, if you please," Sir Henry complied, though his steps were slower than usual, and his posture stooped under the weight of grief and responsibility. They passed through a series of corridors until the faint, lingering echo of earlier merriment hovered in the air like a ghost of the evening that had been. Sir Henry pushed open the tall wooden doors, and the music hall revealed itself. It was a long chamber, lofty and elegant, with a vaulted ceiling of carved panels depicting scenes from winter folklore. Candle sconces stood unlit along the walls now, leaving the room illuminated only by a single lamp and the pale spill of moonlight filtered through frosted windows. At the far end stood a grand piano, its glossy surface reflecting the dim glow. Carved music stands and chairs for small ensembles occupied the opposite side. The air held a faint scent of old wood, Polish, and something else. A trace of smoke so faint it might have been imagined. Poirot advanced slowly, his eyes taking in everything. The arrangement of chairs, the positioning of the piano bench, the way certain sheets of music had been set aside. Then he saw it. On the piano's music rest, a single sheet lay open flat, deliberate, as if left in readiness for the next singer, a carol. "Winter Blessings," Sir Henry said, recognizing it. "A favorite of Mother's. We always attempt it at Christmas, though no one remembers all the verses." Poirot moved closer, bending slightly. The sheet was not just open. It had been marked. A verse near the bottom of the page had been underlined in ink, not lightly, not playfully, but with firm pressure, and beside it, a small blot, an irregular smudge of deep crimson. Poirot read the verse aloud. Beneath the lantern's winter glow, "The truth shall fall with the snow." He straightened, and the quiet room seemed to shrink around him. Sir Henry frowned. "I don't recall that verse being marked earlier." Poirot touched the ink gently. It was dry, but not fully set. The pigment remained unusually bright, as though the marking had been done recently, very recently. "It is not coincidence," Poirot murmured. "It is a message." "A message," Sir Henry echoed, bewildered. "Who would write such a thing?" Poirot considered. Someone who wished to hint at what was to come. Someone who knew that an event under the lantern would reveal truth, or rather they intended truth to appear so. He pointed to the ink smudge. "This color, Sir Henry, it is the same shade as the ribbon tied around Mr. Armitage's wrist." Sir Henry stared at him. "You mean to say Simone prepared this hint beforehand?" Poirot nodded slowly. The ribbon, the verse, the extinguished lantern, all staged to create a theatrical atmosphere. The killer is one who thinks in symbols, who understands drama, who wants something more than a simple killing. They want meaning assigned to it. Sir Henry's face paled. "Meaning? What kind of meaning could murder ever have?" "That is the question we must answer," Poirot replied softly. He examined the sheet more closely. The verse's lettering was neat, practiced. The underlining was in careful strokes, yet swift enough to leave the smudge at the margin. A sudden memory pricked at Poirot, Lydia Vale's hands moving in the candlelight earlier. Long fingers with faint smudges of pigment near the nails, traces of ink she had claimed were from script revisions. But he did not speak this aloud. Instead, he traced the position of the sheet relative to the piano bench. The bench had been recently used. The cushion bore the imprint of someone who had sat there, shifting slightly. Nearby, the metronome had been wound, its pendulum frozen mid-swing, as though silenced abruptly. Sir Henry noticed Poirot's gaze. "Claire played earlier," he said. "She and Lydia sang a verse or two, and then others joined in. But I do not recall that particular carol being used, not tonight." "That is important," Poirot said. "If no one selected this carol for performance, then someone placed it here. For whom? For whoever returned later. The sheet was meant to be seen, and the verse to be read." Poirot moved from the piano to a small table against the wall. On it sat a fountain pen and an inkwell. The ink was crimson, red identical in tone to the smear on the music sheet. He lifted the pen carefully. The nib was stained, and the cap lay beside it. "Someone used this ink," Poirot said softly, and then tied a ribbon of the same color to Armitage's wrist. Sir Henry blinked. "Are you suggesting that whoever wrote that verse also murdered him?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Not necessarily, but they acted with foreknowledge. They were preparing a narrative." He set the pen down. "And that," he said, "is the mark of someone who wishes their actions to be discovered on their terms." He turned his attention to the chairs arranged in a semicircle facing the piano. One chair had been dragged slightly out of alignment. On its wooden back, a faint tear caught Poirot's eye. He bent to inspect it. There, caught on a rough splinter, was a thread of fabric green, matching exactly the torn cloth he had found in the courtyard. He plucked it free delicately. "The torn fabric found outside," he murmured. "Its companion thread lies here, in the music hall." Sir Henry frowned. "Does that mean the same person came into this room before?" "Yes, before the murder. Perhaps long before." Poirot rose, looking slowly around the room. This was no spontaneous act. The killer, or someone involved, spent time arranging symbols, hints, illusions. They moved swiftly, yet left traces. They wished us to see a pattern. He crossed to the window. Snow pressed hard against it, muting the view of the night beyond. But on the inside something else drew his attention, a faint handprint on the glass. It was partial, smudged, at an angle suggesting someone had leaned forward. Looking out, fresh Poirot touched it lightly. The glass was still faintly warmer where the hand had rested. "Simone," he said, "was here minutes before Malcolm Armitage fell. Someone watching the courtyard, perhaps, or waiting for a signal." Sir Henry swallowed. "Poirot, I fear what you will uncover." Poirot's gaze softened. "And yet, Sir Henry, uncover it we must. For until we understand the motive, the method, the theatre behind this act, we cannot hope to find the killer." He returned to the piano and studied the verse again. "Beneath the lantern's winter glow, the truth shall fall with the snow." The lantern, the snow, the truth falling, like Armitage himself, Poirot murmured. This is a warning, or a declaration, or perhaps a prophecy made by the killer. He looked up sharply. "And carols, Sir Henry? They stop mid. Note only when the singer is interrupted." Sir Henry blinked. "Interrupted by what?" "By discovery," Poirot said. He tested the piano keys lightly. One of them made no sound. The felt beneath had been removed. Unusual, deliberate. Poirot slid the key upward gently. Beneath it lay a folded scrap of paper. Sir Henry gasped. "Good heavens!" Poirot retrieved the note, unfolding it with great care. The handwriting was looping, confident, theatrical. There were only 5 words. "He should never have come," Sir Henry whispered. "Poirot, what does that mean?" Poirot's face was unreadable. "It means, Sir Henry, that a certain person believed Malcolm Armitage's very presence tonight was a danger or a threat, and that person prepared this note as preface to what followed." He folded the paper. "And it means," he added quietly, "that the killer did not act in panic. They acted with intention." Poirot stood very still, listening to the house settle in the storm. Somewhere a window rattled, somewhere a clock ticked, somewhere, far across the manor, a floorboard creaked under the weight of someone moving. "Come," he said, "there is more to see." He stepped back from the piano, surveying the room one final time. The marked verse, the ink smudge, the torn thread, the hidden note. A message had been sent long before Malcolm Armitage died beneath the lantern. The carol lay open on the piano, waiting, accusing, unfinished. Just like the truth, Chapter 5. The secret in the attic of ornaments. The storm had reached its full fury by the time Poirot made his way toward the upper floors of Frostbridge Manor. The house groaned softly as wind pressed against stone and timber, and the old windows trembled in their casings. Somewhere below, a door banged as a draught caught it. The once festive atmosphere had dissolved entirely, replaced by a silence steeped in dread. Poirot ascended the staircase with deliberate steps. He paused once to glance down the corridor, long, dim, lined with portraits, whose painted eyes seemed to track his movement. The family of Frostbridge watched, generation upon generation, and Poirot found himself wondering which of their descendants was now playing at secrets and symbolism. Not one of them, he reflected, would have imagined Malcolm Armitage dying beneath their ancestral lantern. Not one would have predicted a night of murder. At the top of the stairs he turned left, then right, following a narrow corridor that had not seen much use in recent years. Sir Henry had called it the North Wing. Though that wing consisted now of little more than storage rooms, linen cupboards, and the narrow staircase leading to the attic. Poirot sought that staircase. He found it behind a door of plain, unvarnished wood, a door that blended so perfectly with the wall paneling that one might easily overlook it. The hinges gave a faint sigh of protest as he opened it. A chill rose up from the stairwell like a breath from a long-forgotten tomb. He lifted a lantern from the wall hook, lit its small electric bulb, and began to climb. The narrow steps creaked beneath his weight, each one sending tiny puffs of dust into the air. The ceiling slanted sharply as he reached the top, forcing him to stoop slightly. Before him stretched the attic, vast, cluttered, smelling faintly of cedar, must, and the lingering sweetness of old holiday greenery. Frostbridge Manor, it seemed, did not discard its Christmases, it hoarded them. Rows of wooden chests lined the floorboards, boxes labeled in Sir Henry's cramped handwriting. Ornaments, 1890, lantern garlands, seasonal banners, costumes, Frostbridge masks, were stacked in uneven towers. A few cardboard crates appeared newer, perhaps added by Jonathan or Claire in recent years. In the center of the attic, beneath a slanted beam, stood a tangle of wireframes and papier, fake figures representing winter spirits, their painted faces cracked and faded. Poirot paused, studying them. They were remnants of some long-abandoned Frostbridge tradition, perhaps a pageant once performed for visiting children or the village choir. His gaze traveled upward along the rafters, and there he saw it, a lantern. Not the one hanging in the great hall below, but its twin. It hung from a hook on a central beam, obscured by layers of cobweb and old greenery. The mistletoe around it had long since dried, its leaves brittle and yellowed. Unlike the polished, pristine lantern that had so ceremoniously failed earlier that night, this one bore the scars of time, and something else. Poirot approached slowly, his footsteps soundless on the dusty floor. As he drew closer, the differences became clear. This lantern was cracked. A fissure ran across the metal frame, splitting one of the decorative curves. Another section had buckled inward, warped by an intense heat that had once licked its surface. The metal was blackened in places, as though from flame, and the candles inside, long since dead, had melted into irregular shapes, mingled into a fused mass at the bottom of the iron cage. Poirot touched the frame lightly. It was cold. Rust had begun to creep along the fracture, giving the lantern a neglected, sorrowful appearance. A twin, Poirot murmured. An older version, or perhaps the original. Why had Sir Henry never mentioned a second lantern? Why keep it here hidden, half buried by time? He peered inside. Something lay among the melted wax. He bent closer. A photograph. It had been almost completely charred. Only the lower portion remained untouched enough to decipher. Poirot drew out a pair of tweezers from his pocket. He seldom traveled without such tools, and gently extracted the fragile remnant. As he lifted it into the lantern's glow, his breath tightened. The photograph showed two people standing side by side. The face of the person on the left was scorched, the edges eaten away by fire. But the face on the right, though marred by ash and curling at the edges, was still visible. Malcolm Armitage. Younger, perhaps 20 years younger. His hair darker, his jaw smoother, but his expression unmistakably that of the man who now lay dead below. The other figure, what remained of it, had been deliberately scratched out. Not by fire. The damage was too precise. A blade or nail had gouged the surface, scoring deep lines where the facial features had once been. Poirot's gaze sharpened. Simone wished very much that the identity of this second person would not be known. He tilted the photograph under the lantern's beam. A faint trace remained, part of a coat collar, the corner of a brooch, a hint of dark hair. But not enough to identify the individual. Poirot turned to inspect the interior of the lantern again. Beneath the fused wax lay a small pile of ash that had once been paper, perhaps more photographs, perhaps letters. Had this lantern once been used in a fire? Perhaps a fire that almost consumed it? The warping told a story of intense heat. not accidental candle flame. Poirot placed the charred photograph on a nearby crate and reached out to examine the lantern more closely. Then he noticed something else. The metal near the base was darker, not merely burnt but stained. A faint reddish tint clung to the underside of the frame, almost invisible, unless one stood very close. Poirot touched it gently and rubbed his fingers together. Not wax, not rust, something older, something that, under other circumstances, he might have identified more readily. But he did not speak the word aloud. It was a piece of Frostbridge history deliberately hidden away. But who had hidden it? And why? He scanned the attic again. Near the lot of decoration crates, a wooden box sat open. Inside were lengths of old ribbon, deep crimson, identical in shade to the one that had been tied around Armitage's wrist. Poirot lifted one ribbon. It was frayed at the ends as though cut many times. The sight of it stirred something in his mind, an echo of the ink on the music sheet, the color smeared on the carol's margin. He turned sharply as the attic door creaked open behind him. Poirot did not startle, but he straightened and turned, lantern raised. A figure stood silhouetted at the top of the narrow stairwell, Jonathan Frostbridge. He stepped inside, ducking beneath the low beam. His expression was strained, his clothes dusted lightly with snow from his brief venture downstairs earlier. "Mr. Poirot," he said quietly. "I thought I heard movement," Father said. "You had come up here. Are you all right?" Poirot studied him closely. "Quite well, Monsieur Jonathan. And you?" "I have been better," Jonathan said grimly. "Dr. Marsh is with the body. Claire is trying to calm Mrs. Lang, who is hysterical. Lydia is pacing, and Colonel Hargreaves is arguing with the Reverend about divine judgment." He gave a hollow half-laugh. "Christmas Eve at Frostbridge Manor." Poirot nodded. "And what brings you to the attic? Did Sir Henry send you?" Jonathan hesitated a fraction too long. "I was curious." "Curiosity," Poirot said softly, "is a dangerous companion tonight." Jonathan stepped closer, scanning the attic. "I have not been up here in years. Claire used to come up and dig through boxes looking for old costumes. I never liked it. Too many memories, too much dust." He froze as his eyes fell on the cracked lantern. "Good Lord," he whispered. "I had forgotten all about that." "Forgotten," Poirot repeated, watching him carefully. "So you knew of its existence?" Jonathan swallowed. "Yes, it was used once. Long ago, before my time. Father told me it had been damaged in a fire. He said it was dangerous, unstable, so he had it replaced with the new lantern we use now." Poirot angled his head. "And why was it not thrown away? Why hide it here?" "Father is sentimental," Jonathan said. "He keeps everything." Poirot did not entirely believe it. "And the photograph?" Poirot asked, lifting the charred remnant. Jonathan stared, color drained from his face. "Armitage," he said, almost choking the word, "and someone else. But who?" Poirot held the photograph close to Jonathan. "Look carefully. Does anything of the second figure seem familiar to you?" Jonathan shook his head slowly. "Number. But the fire, what happened? Who burned this?" "That is what we must determine," Poirot said gently. "Tell me, Jonathan, did your father ever speak to you of a quarrel? A quarrel involving this lantern, or involving Malcolm Armitage?" "No," Jonathan said. "Father respected Armitage's business sense, even if they disagreed at times. But a quarrel connected to a lantern, Number Poirot, regarded him narrowly. Sir Henry did not speak of it even once." Jonathan's eyes flickered. Poirot caught the movement. "There is something," Poirot said softly. "You hesitate." Jonathan exhaled slowly, as though a weight within him were shifting. "There was." "A story," he said at last. "A story about a Christmas Eve long ago. Father told it only once, when I was a boy. Something about a quarrel between two young men, one a Frostbridge cousin, one a friend from the village. They argued under the old lantern. Something happened. A fight, perhaps. The lantern fell. There was a fire." Jonathan looked at the cracked metal frame. "I did not think it was real. A legend, a ghost story. But that," he gestured at the lantern. "That," is the lantern from the story, isn't it? Poirot said nothing. Who were the young men? Jonathan asked, almost pleading. Who was the Frostbridge cousin? Who was the friend? Poirot's gaze drifted back to the photograph. Something happened, Poirot said quietly. Beneath a lantern, something that left scars, physical and otherwise. Jonathan stepped back. You think Armitage was connected to that old incident? I think, Poirot said, that someone wished to remind us of it. Someone who used symbols, lanterns, carols, ribbons, to retell a story that began long before tonight. Jonathan stared at him. But why now? Why kill him now? Poirot raised the lantern, casting long shadows across the attic. That, he said, is the part of the story we have yet to uncover. He pocketed the charred photograph, then closed the cracked lantern gently. It swayed slightly on its hook, creaking softly, a mournful echo of the hall's lantern, the one that had flickered and died at the moment of Armitage's fall. Poirot turned toward the stairwell. There is more here, Jonathan, much more. But we must proceed carefully. Every old wound in this house is now reopening. Jonathan ran a hand through his hair, distraught. Poirot, if an old secret is to blame for this, then someone in this house has lived with it for years. Someone dangerous. Poirot nodded once. Yes, Monsieur Jonathan, and such a person, when danger arrives, does not improvise, they prepare. He looked one last time at the cracked lantern. And they begin, he murmured, by rewriting history. He stepped into the stairwell, leaving behind the attic of forgotten ornaments, old ghosts, and the secret that had lain smoldering above Frostbridge Manor for decades. Chapter 6. The shadow in the chapel window, the storm raged harder still as midnight approached, as though nature herself had chosen to echo the turmoil inside Frostbridge Manor. Wind shrieked across the eaves in thin, wild notes, and the windows shook with each gust, straining in their frames like living things desperate to escape. The house, ordinarily so proud and self-contained, now seemed to tremble under the weight of secrets, threatening to break loose. Poirot descended the main staircase after leaving the attic, his mind charged with new questions, questions born of the cracked lantern, the charred photograph, and Jonathan's half-remembered tale of quarrels past. The house felt different now, less like a refuge, more like a labyrinth woven by a patient hand. And Poirot knew with certainty that whoever had killed Malcolm Armitage had long prepared the maze through which he now walked. From the landing below, Claire Frostbridge appeared, breathless and pale. Mr. Poirot, thank heavens. I've been looking everywhere. Simmons said you had gone upstairs. But then Jonathan didn't know where you were. And, be calm, mademoiselle, Poirot said gently. The house is large, but I do not vanish so easily as footprints in the snow. Claire attempted a smile, but it faltered. Father wishes to see you when you are able, but someone else is asking for you, Alice. The young maid, she's in a state, Mr. Poirot. She says she saw something she shouldn't have. Poirot's eyes sharpened. Where is she now? In the chapel? The chapel, Poirot repeated. At this hour? Claire nodded. She refused to stay in the servants' hall. Said she would only speak to you somewhere with God watching. Those were her words. I didn't know what else to do, so I sent her to the chapel and told her you would come. Poirot bowed his head slightly. Then I shall go at once. He followed Claire along a side corridor, past a row of dusty portraits and a deep-set window rattling under the storm's assault. They reached a small arched door framed in dark oak. It is through here, Claire whispered. She is inside. I shall wait out here, if you don't mind. Chapels make me uneasy, Poirot nodded. No doubt tonight they make many uneasy. He pushed open the chapel door and stepped inside. The chapel was small, scarcely more than a long alcove carved into the side of the manor. The walls were stone, old and cool to the touch, faintly glistening in the lantern light Poirot carried. Rows of narrow wooden benches lined the floor, and at the far end stood a modest altar, draped in white linen. Above it, a stained glass window depicted an angel scattering winter blossoms over a sleeping village. Tonight, however, the angel's colors were muted, its serene expression fractured by the erratic lightning that flashed through the storm. Poirot took several steps forward. He knew immediately that something was wrong. A bench near the front had been overturned, lying on its side as though knocked or violently pushed. One candle from the tall iron stand beside the altar lay broken on the floor, its wax shattered into pieces like fractured bone. A faint scorch mark marred the stone beneath it, as if someone had tried to relight it and failed. And on the altar cloth near the edge, a smudge of crimson. Poirot moved closer, lowering his lantern. Not blood, ink, the same deep red ink that had marked the carol in the music hall and stained the ribbon on Armitage's wrist. "Everything connects," Poirot murmured. "Everywhere, the same message." A soft sound drew his attention. A muffled sob. Alice, the young maid, sat in the front pew with her hands clasped tightly over her mouth, shoulders trembling. Poirot approached with measured quietness. He knelt beside her. "My child," he said softly, "you wish to speak to me, and so I am here. Tell me what troubles you." Alice lowered her hands. Her face was blotched with tears, and her eyes were wide with fear. "I'm sorry, Mr. Poirot," she whispered. "I didn't know where else to go. I didn't know who to tell." "You have chosen wisely," Poirot said, "begging at the beginning." Alice wiped her eyes with her sleeve. "After the lantern went out, and after Mr. Armitage fell, Mrs. Grove sent us to our quarters. She said we were underfoot, but I couldn't stay there. I couldn't sleep." "What disturbed you?" Poirot asked gently. Alice hesitated. "I thought I heard something. A noise coming from this direction, like someone walking but not walking normally, sort of dragging one foot. Or maybe someone hurt." Poirot listened, expression intent but calm. "I came to look," she continued. "I know I shouldn't have, but I did. I pushed the chapel door open just a little, just to see if someone was inside." Her breath quickened. Poirot waited. "There was someone," she whispered. "A figure standing by the window." Poirot's eyes lifted instinctively to the stained glass. Lightning flashed, casting a brief wash of light across the chapel. The angel's outstretched hands glimmered. The colored panes flickered in red and blue. "What did you see, Alice?" Poirot asked. "I couldn't see the person clearly," the girl murmured. "It was too dark. Only their shape. They were standing right in front of the window, so the light behind them made them a shadow, tall, still. Not like someone praying, not like someone who belonged here." "You sensed something unnatural," Poirot said softly. "Yes," she swallowed. "And they were holding something." "What?" "A bright red thing, red as Christmas berries, or a ribbon." Poirot felt a chill move through him, not from the cold, but from understanding. "And did the figure see you?" he asked. Alice nodded, trembling. They turned their head, only a little, but enough. "I ran. I didn't stop running until I reached Miss Clare." Poirot placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "You were very brave to come to me," he said. "You have seen something important." Alice sniffed. "Am I in trouble?" "No," Poirot assured her. "Quite the opposite. You may have saved a life this night, perhaps even your own." Alice's eyes widened. Poirot rose and surveyed the chapel again. The overturned bench, the broken candle, the ink smear on the altar cloth, the smudge near the window. Yes, there it was, a faint patch where fingerprints had blurred the dust. Someone had been here minutes earlier, but they had not come to pray. No, they had come to perform a ritual, a staging, a message. Poirot moved toward the stained glass window. The angel's hands were cupped, as though offering something unseen. And along the lower edge of the window frame, fresh scratches scored the stone, long, narrow marks, as though from metal dragged against it. "A struggle," Poirot murmured. "Or an attempt to remove something." He knelt, running his fingertips over the scratches. The markings were recent. The stone dust still loose, not yet settled. The killer had been here, And they had not merely stood. They had acted from behind him, Alice whispered. Mr. Poirot, why would someone come here? Why frighten me? Why frighten anyone? Poirot turned to her, his own expression reflective, somber. My child, he said gently, whoever killed Mr. Armitage is not merely concealing a crime. They are shaping a narrative with symbols and scenes. They seek to terrify someone. Not you, not the guests. Someone specific. Alice's voice quivered. Why? Poirot looked again at the overturned bench, the broken candle, the crimson ink. To weaken them, he said slowly, to break their courage, to force a confession, or to trigger a collapse. Alice shivered. But who is the killer targeting? Poirot lowered his voice, his eyes narrowing with dawning certainty. The person who shares the secret behind the cracked lantern, the original fire. The person who stands at the heart of the old quarrel, the one who could expose them. He turned toward the door. And I believe, he said softly, that the killer is staging these scenes not to hide the truth, but to torment the one person who knows it. Alice clutched her hands tightly. Do you know who that is, Mr. Poirot? Poirot paused, lantern held before him, his reflection trembled in the stained glass. I know, he said quietly, that someone in this house is reliving a very old fear, and someone else is determined to use that fear to deadly effect. He approached the door, then stopped. Tell me one thing, Alice, he said without turning. When you saw the figure in the window, were they alone? Alice frowned, thinking, I believe so. Yes, I didn't see anyone else. Poirot nodded. Then the overturned bench and the candle were staged, not the result of struggle, but the illusion of one. He glanced once more around the chapel. The killer, Poirot whispered, is laying out scenes like chapters in a story, each one designed to unsettle, and the next chapter may be the most dangerous yet. He opened the door. Come, Alice, tonight. No one should walk these corridors alone. Together they stepped into the dimly lit hallway beyond, leaving the chapel behind. But even as they left, the storm outside roared louder, and the stained glass angel flickered in the wind, its serene smile seeming for one impossible moment to twist into something like warning. Chapter 7. The ribbon that wrapped the truth. The snow had finally begun to ease when Poirot sent word through Simmons that all guests and household members were to gather once more in the great hall. The request, or rather, the quiet command spread through Frostbridge Manor like the whisper of a final bell. Those who heard it felt an involuntary tightening in their chests. No one wished to return to the hall. No one wished to stand beneath the lantern where Malcolm Armitage had fallen. Yet all came Sir Henry, wan and troubled Claire, pale but determined, Jonathan tense with dread, Lydia Vale, whose sharp eyes betrayed her fear despite her composed posture, Mrs. Lang, trembling visibly, Dr. Marsh, grim and watchful, Colonel Hargreaves, blustering but subdued, Mrs. Groves, rigid as carved marble, Edwin Rowe, sweating slightly, and Arthur Hales, the caretaker, silent, expression unreadable. Poirot arrived last, walking with measured grace. He moved to the center of the hall and looked up. The mistletoe lantern glowed overhead, freshly relit. Its light was steady now, steady and cold, revealing every line of strain on every face gathered below. The room was silent except for the low hum of the storm's retreat, and the gentle flicker of the lantern's candlelight. Poirot folded his hands behind his back. Mise, he stopped himself. Ladies and gentlemen. The room tensed, all eyes fixed upon him. There comes a moment in every case, Poirot said softly, when the truth ceases to hide, and instead waits to be claimed. Jonathan spoke first, voice tight. Poirot, do you know who killed Malcolm Armitage? Poirot inclined his head. I do, and I shall tell you. But first, you must understand the method, for this killer did not strike blindly. They struck theatrically with purpose, with symbolism, with a design that has spanned years. A ripple passed through the room. Poirot turned slowly, looking at each face. You have seen scenes staged to terrify, he said. The flickering lantern, the footprints that ended in untouched snow, the marked carol sheet, the overturned bench in the chapel. And tonight, in the attic, we discovered the cracked lantern and the charred photograph. Claire shivered, all of it planned. Yes, Poirot said, planned by a killer who understands that fear is most powerful when wrapped in tradition and memory. He gestured upward to the mistletoe lantern. This object has been the center of Frostbridge Christmases for generations. But it is also the center of an older story, a story of violence and secrets. Sir Henry closed his eyes. Poirot continued. Long ago, beneath the former lantern, the one now hidden in the attic, there was a confrontation, a quarrel between two young men, one of them a Frostbridge relative, the other a friend from the village. He paused. Malcolm Armitage. A gasp rose. Sir Henry whispered, "You knew." "I suspected," Poirot replied. "The photograph confirmed it, because the second face, the one scratched out, was not random. It was not erased by accident. It was erased because someone feared what would happen if that face were recognized." Mrs. Lang pressed a hand to her throat. Lydia Vale looked between Poirot and the lantern with dawning horror. Poirot resumed. The quarrel that night led to a fire. The old lantern cracked, was scorched, and nearly fell. Someone was hurt gravely, and the truth of that night was buried, but one person remembered. His eyes settled upon Arthur Hales. The caretaker did not move. Poirot's voice lowered. Hales was a boy then, but he saw what happened. He saw Malcolm Armitage strike the first blow. He saw the lantern fall. He saw the injuries that resulted, and he saw the Frostbridge family, understandably, protect their own. Sir Henry's face crumpled. "God help us, Arthur," Poirot went on. "For years, Hales carried that truth alone, but Malcolm Armitage did not vanish from the world. He prospered. He became Sir Henry's advisor. He walked these halls with impunity, and recently he threatened to expose the old secret, not out of remorse but for advantage." Hales's jaw clenched. "Armitage wanted the land sold," Poirot said. "The south field, the woods. He wanted development, investment, profit. And he knew that if the truth of the old accident emerged, it would tarnish the Frostbridge name. So he used it as leverage over Sir Henry and over Arthur Hales, who was the living witness." Jonathan stepped forward, aghast. "Arthur, is this true? Why didn't you tell us?" Hales remained silent. His stillness was answer enough. Poirot continued in a measured tone. "Now consider the clues, the faint smell of smoke in the snow, the footsteps that ended abruptly, the torn green fabric, matching the cloth in Hales's workshop, the carol marked with the line about the lantern, the ink, the same red ink kept in Hales's quarters for repairing lantern decorations. And finally, Poirot lifted the crimson ribbon. This, Hales's eyes flicked toward it, just for a moment, but enough. This ribbon, Poirot said, was tied around Armitage's wrist after he fell. It was no accident, no festive flourish. It was a signature, and it came from only one place in the house, the caretaker's workshop where he crafts the garlands and trimmings for the Christmas displays. Mrs. Groves whispered, "The ribbon, Arthur. Why?" Poirot's voice softened with surprising pity. Hales staged scenes to frighten, to unsettle, to create the appearance of supernatural intervention. But his true aim was human, to break Malcolm Armitage before the man could break the Frostbridge family. Poirot stepped closer to Hales. "You confronted him tonight," Poirot said quietly, "perhaps in the chapel, perhaps in the hall's shadow before the lantern ceremony. He mocked you. He threatened to expose you all, and when the lantern flickered, you saw your moment." Hales finally spoke. "Expose them." His voice was rough. "Number, he threatened to expose you, Sir Henry, to ruin your family, to ruin everything I've protected for 30 years. Sir Henry stared at him stricken. "Arthur, we were boys. We were frightened. We made mistakes, yes, but—" "You made mistakes," Hales said bitterly. He made choices, and I lived with the truth while he walked free. Claire whispered, "You killed him." Hales turned to her, his face full of anguish. "He was going to destroy your father, your name, everything good in this house. I couldn't let that happen." Poirot raised a hand. "Enough." The word echoed through the hall. Silence fell. The lantern flickered. Poirot's voice was cool, gentle, absolute. "Arthur Hales, you staged a theatrical crime. You used fear as your weapon, but your methods betrayed you. The ink, the ribbon, the lantern symbolism, the staged chapel scene. You sought to protect the Frostbridge family. But you have condemned yourself." Hales bowed his head. "If it saves them, it is worth it." Sir Henry stepped forward, voice breaking. "Arthur, I would never have let Malcolm expose that night. I would rather have faced truth than see you, my oldest friend, destroy yourself." Hayes looked at him, and for the first time that night, tears welled in his eyes. Poirot stepped back, folding his hands. "The truth," he said quietly, "has fallen with the snow." And above them, the mistletoe lantern glowed, no longer a symbol of protection, but of revelation. Chapter 8. Christmas dawn over Frostbridge Manor. Christmas morning arrived, not with triumphant bells or bright winter sunshine, but with a pale, exhausted light spreading slowly across the snow-laden grounds of Frostbridge Manor. The storm had spent itself in the night. In its wake, patches of the courtyard that had been buried under drifts began to emerge as the wind shifted, revealing shapes, impressions, and secrets that had briefly been hidden beneath layers of white silence. Inside the manor, time felt suspended. The great hall was still, the mistletoe lantern glowing with a soft, steady light, its warmth touching the edges of the polished floor, where only hours earlier the house had stood shrouded in shock. Poirot stood alone beneath the lantern, hands clasped neatly behind his back, gazing upward. The candles flickered with calm now, no hint of the sudden extinguishing that had signaled the moment of Armitage's death. They burned as though nothing had happened at all, and yet everything had behind him. The footsteps of the constable arrived, slow, cautious. The county police had finally reached the manor at dawn, having been delayed by the storm's final onslaught. Inspector Buckley, a stout man with the humble gravity of someone unused to finding murder in the estates of the well, "To do," offered Poirot a respectful nod. "Mr. Poirot," he said quietly, "my men have finished the first search outside. Some of the snow has drifted off. You may want to see what's turned up." Poirot inclined his head. "I believe I do, Inspector." Together they stepped through the manor's open doors into the icy breath of Christmas dawn. Footprints revealed, the courtyard was washed in a faint golden-grey light. Here and there, tufts of old snow clung stubbornly to niches and corners, but the shifting wind had swept much of the powder back toward the hedges, exposing stretches of the path that had been hidden in the night. And in those stretches lay the truth. Inspector Buckley pointed. "We thought you'd want the first look." Poirot moved forward, his breath puffing in short. Even clouds. What had been invisible in the storm was clear now. A single trail of footprints, not ending abruptly, not vanishing into mystery, but continuing in a faint arc behind the drift that had once concealed them. The footprints did not disappear. They doubled back. Poirot crouched, his eyes narrowing with satisfaction. "You see, Inspector," he said quietly. The killer walked forward into the snow, then turned sharply, perhaps with the lantern still bright in their mind, and returned along their own trail. The wind piled new snow atop, the returning steps hiding them. Thus it appeared as though the prints ended. Buckley shook his head. "A clever way to mislead." "Oui." "Ah." Poirot caught himself, the familiar word slipping. "Yes, Inspector, but not clever enough." The arc of the returning path was subtle, and would have fooled most eyes, yet Poirot saw at once the faint flattening of snow grains, the slight discoloration left where boots had pressed into the earlier layer. Arthur Hales had indeed staged the scene outside, just as he had staged each symbolic moment within the manor. Buckley exhaled heavily. He's admitted it now, broken down completely. Says he's been waiting for this night for years. Poirot straightened. He has been living with two truths, what he saw as a boy, and what he feared would happen if Malcolm Armitage revealed it. The guilt is old, the fear is new, but fear, Inspector, is often the more powerful master. Buckley nodded grimly. Sir Henry is devastated. Poirot glanced toward the manor's grand facade, now tinged with the first blush of dawn, even when one tries to forget them. The manor awakens as they walked back inside. The house felt changed, not healed perhaps, but beginning the slow work of becoming whole again. Claire sat by the drawing-room hearth, a blanket around her shoulders. Jonathan was beside her, staring thoughtfully into the flames. Lydia Vale had withdrawn upstairs, white-faced and shaken. Mrs. Lang remained in quiet conversation with Reverend Kettering, her grief softened by the knowledge that none of her misfortunes had rested on her own shoulders. Colonel Hargreaves paced restlessly, muttering occasionally about damn dramatic villains. Mrs. Groves alone moved with purpose, restoring order to the morning routine despite her trembling hands. The rhythms of the household would resume, they always did. Sir Henry emerged from a side room, his eyes red, his posture stooped. When he saw Poirot, he approached with the dignity of a man attempting to reconcile tragedy with gratitude. "Poirot," he said quietly, "I scarcely know how to thank you. You have saved my family, though at such terrible cost." Poirot gave a small grave bow. "Sir Henry, you must understand. Nothing I uncovered last night began with me. The truth was already here, woven into the fabric of your family story. It was waiting." Sir Henry nodded. "Arthur believed he was protecting us." "Yes," Poirot replied gently, "and in doing so, he became a prisoner of the past. It is a common tragedy, Sir Henry, one of the oldest." Sir Henry looked away, swallowing hard. "Will he?" "The law must take its course," Poirot said. Sir Henry closed his eyes. "I fear Christmas will never be the same at Frostbridge." Poirot regarded him kindly. "Perhaps not. Yet traditions do not break, Sir Henry. They adapt, and grief is not the end of a family. It is the beginning of wisdom." Sir Henry managed a faint, sad smile. "You speak like a man who has seen many tragedies." Poirot's eyes softened. "I have seen many truths, Sir Henry, and some truths, painful though they may be, free us." The lantern's final glow, Poirot returned once more to the hall, drawn almost unconsciously beneath the mistletoe lantern. The candle still burned with perfect steadiness. No flicker, no sign of the violent dance that had preceded Armitage's collapse. He reached up, almost touching the iron frame. "The lantern did not fail," he murmured. "It reacted." Poirot understood now. The flickering had been caused deliberately. A small draught created by hails, the opening of a door, a movement at the right angle, had unsettled the candles only for a moment. Enough to draw every eye upward, enough to mask the moment he slipped the poison into Armitage's drink, enough to disguise the victim's sudden convulsion as something connected to the lantern's extinguishing. A performance designed with precision, Hales had been a craftsman of symbols, a man who knew how to make a story out of shadows and firelight. But truth had a light of its own. And now it glowed calmly above Poirot, shorn at last of theatrics. Christmas morning, he stepped out through the manor's doors into the pale morning air. The sky, washed with early gold, stretched wide over the white-draped fields. A few birds, braver than most, began to stir in the hedgerows. Behind him, Frostbridge Manor stood quiet, contemplative, a house that had survived decades of storms, both those wrought by nature and those made by human hearts. Poirot inhaled the cold, clean air and allowed himself a moment of stillness, a moment of peace. His work here was done. A life lost. Yes, a secret unearthed. A family shaken but no longer trapped in shadows, and a lantern, once dimmed by fear, that now burned a little brighter for the truth it had witnessed. Poirot adjusted his coat, tucked his gloves neatly into his pocket, and stepped forward, leaving crisp footprints in the untouched stretch of snow before him. Christmas dawn had broken over Frostbridge Manor, and with it, a new beginning.